Tonight I have my first guest on the podcast yet. This is an actual real life friend of mine who tricked me when he started following me and I started listening to him. And I said, "This is incredible stuff. You live in Santa Fe. We should meet up." And the paranormalist said, "Brother, we've already met up." Paranormalist, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Thomas. It's great to be talking to you, and I'm glad to be your guest here on your podcast.
Me too. I love that. I love this a lot. This is going to be great. Tell us about your podcast. What is your show about? What do you talk about? I mean, the name kind of gives it away, but I want to hear your view of what your show's about.
Well, simply put, it's really, as my name indicates, it's about all things strange and weird and paranormal and just bizarre that has to do with the American Southwest. Well, not actually just the Southwest. I decided to make it about the American West in general, but as I started to kind of delve more deeply into the topic, it always kind of seemed to all the strangest stories and the weirdest events, everything seemed to cluster, particularly in the Southwest. So it's also the area I'm most familiar with. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and so I'm more familiar with New Mexico and parts of Colorado, southern Colorado, eastern Utah, and I'd say northeastern and northern Arizona, and which is interesting because it's that seems to be actually where the most interesting stories seem to happen anyway. So that's what I started to do. It started kind of as a Substack site with some essays that I would write. I'd say about 2 or 3 years ago, and it just kind of went from there. Just looking into every strange story I could find, cryptids, weird encounters, UFOs and aliens figure prominently in many stories, but it's not exclusively that. Other supernatural tales and whatever I could find that was strange and interesting about the Southwest.
The show, by the way, for everyone listening, is incredible. They're short episodes and they're fun and you can gobble them up and they're great. And you mentioned something like the area where you focused is the Four Corners. That's the Southwest right there. But I did the same thing when I started my podcast. I was like, I'm going to do it on the Southwest. And then it grew to the West. And now I've kind of hyper focused it to the Southwest again. But another thing that you said was talking about, so you're talking about all these paranormal things, aliens, you've talked about monsters. I don't know if you had a ghost episode. Have you had a ghost episode yet?
I haven't really had anything that focuses on ghosts. I want to do that in the future, and actually have some ideas for upcoming stories and episodes that have to do with ghostly tales. But I haven't concentrated too much on that yet.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I've listened to probably the last 15 of them, I think. They're awesome. I love them. But I had, when I first started the show, like a plan for all of the series I wanted to do or episode. I used to think that they were going to be episodes, but then I did like 18 hours over the Apache and 17 hours over the Civil War. So more like series. I had like a episode or series planned on monsters and aliens at the Southwest. And then you started following me and I started listening to you and I was like, I don't need to do this anymore. I just need to have you on. Like you just saved me a whole bunch of books and time and reading, which is great. I love it. I mean, and again, everyone should listen to The Paranormalist. It is a great show. I love it. And thank you for the work that you're doing. And I've loved every episode so far. I do have to say, you have an episode over the Wolfman in Lawton, and I was in the Wichita Mountains last weekend camping, and I didn't see no Wolfman, but it's a great episode. I was looking for him. I was listening for him. How do you feel about in the episode you talk about the possibility of it, and maybe it was just a figment of imagination or teenagers, or maybe it was an escaped Lawton or no Fort Sill beast or something. So that actually is a better question is when you read this stuff, how open to the stories are you?
Well, first of all, I like to say, I think you should do an episode on the paranormal and the supernatural. I I appreciate you saying everything you did, but I'd love to hear you have one about that. I think you do probably a much better job than I do. And you know, I try to do my best. I try to go through the stories, but I appreciate everything you say. And but yeah, I'd still like to hear. I'd like to still hear a story you have about that. I think it would be make an excellent episode. But as
Yep.
far as
I'm
the
sorry to interrupt, but the whole episode will just be me saying, subscribe to the Paranormalist and listen to him.
well, that's not so bad either. You know, that would probably that will up my subscriber count, so that's great. But no, but to answer your question about what well, I call it the Lawton lycanthrope, and or some call it the kind of the Wolfman of Oklahoma, and there's all kinds of different names for it. And it was a very strange story. You really don't hear about it very much. It seems like it would kind of maybe intersect with the field of kind of Bigfoot and stories of cryptids in Oklahoma. But the first time I heard about it was years and years ago. It was actually it was a little kind of a calendar that had it was a day planner, and every day had a different weird or paranormal story on it. And I came across this story about this strange creature that was seen a lot in Oklahoma. And it was around that same time my brother and I were driving out from Florida to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and we actually happened to pass through Lawton, Oklahoma. We spent a night there, so that was the kind of the connection I had with that. And I thought that was just kind of interesting about this strange thing that happened. But and of course, it was a very unusual story. It seemed to me like something was going on, that people were actually seeing something, some sort of a whether it was just a person or and maybe a I don't know, escaped mental patient or whatever it was. But they all seemed to concur that it was a huge humanoid with it was hairy and had kind of almost like a wolf-like snout, which is just seems hard to believe, of course. But there was the story, and they all seemed to be very earnest in their descriptions of it. One man even claimed to have seen it and had a heart attack. So I think they saw something. And in that particular case, as strange as it is, I think something was going on, and I don't really know what to make of it. I mean, I think a lot of these people weren't just making something up, but obviously, I try to keep an open mind. But you kind of have to learn. You have to have your antenna up on some of these stories, because you do come across some very strange and very hard to believe tales. Very hard to believe. Actually, one of my
Hmm.
recent posts was about flying cryptids, and one was about something they call bat squatch. And the name itself
Great name, by the
is
way.
a great name. It's an awesome name, but one of the descriptions in there describes it as being, purple furred and having something like, 30 feet tall, and, an incredible wingspan. That one's a little hard to believe that there's creatures of that size that are flying around in there. But so I try to kind of keep everything on the light side and kind of a humorous side and kind of tongue in cheek. And, I mean, some of these are very hard to believe, and another one that was in there was the West Texas Owl Man. And that one was, it sounds like a bunch of teenagers just kind of having a fun time, and who knows whether it really happened or not. But I try to kind of treat each one as if it's a true tale, but I kind of leave a few humorous asides for the reader to kind of realize that in some of these stories I don't take it quite seriously, and I think that's part of the fun of it.
It absolutely is, and you do a really good job of that.
Thank you.
And this summer, so I had been in 2020 to the shoot UFO Watchtower right
Oh,
next.
did you? Okay.
I did, but it was like the museum was closed. It was snowy and cold, and it was like
Ugh.
day after Christmas. But this summer or last summer in 2024, my wife and I and a couple friends went to it, and we went to the museum,
Hmm.
and we saw, oh, what is that horse's? What did the horse's name? They have the bones of the
S-
horse in the
Snippy.
museum. Snippy.
Yep.
Yeah. They
Yep.
have the bones of Snippy in the museum.
Oh, wow.
And the whole garden is very, I don't know what the kitsch. I don't actually
Yes,
know.
yes. No, I think that's
It
the right term. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a lot of fun,
Mhm.
especially if I were like a teenager. If I was like 15, deep into X Files at the time, like I would have loved it, and I still loved it as a 37-year-old.
Oh, hell
It was
yeah.
great, but I didn't know. that there was a previous story of mutilation in New Mexico before Snippy, and it was
Yeah.
a soldier of all people.
Yep. Yep.
And that you
That
cover that in the episode. I don't remember the title, but you cover that in the episode that you had, and it was a great one. I was like, oh man. Again,
well,
it's one of those, you got to suspend disbelief and just enjoy it. But also, hey, you're never going to believe this, Scully.
that's the horror at Holloman Air Force Base, and I'm glad you liked it. That was one that I recently did just in January, and yeah, I enjoyed that one. It was the account of Jonathan P. Lovett was the soldier, and that one, as you said, everything about that one is just far fetched, but I love it. It's a great story. It's one of the more famous mutilation accounts, but tracking that one down it was interesting. That's one of the things that I really enjoy about it is once you start kind of going down that rabbit hole and you start doing the research, you find out all kinds of strange stuff. So this story, which I never and you never really hear about it in a lot of the accounts before. So I was kind of dimly aware of this story. But once I actually started researching it, the details pile on top of each other, and you start to learn that, well, there was a UFO was seen and some sort. It was, it sounds like a kind of a schlocky B movie from the sci-fi movie from the 50s, and there's like a armored tentacle or something like that, or jointed tentacle that comes out of the UFO, and so in other words, it doesn't use like a tractor beam and just sucks them up into the UFO like you usually see the pictures of the cows being abducted by a flying saucer. In this case, it was an actual physical object comes out like a snake-like tentacle, grabs the guy, hauls him up into the UFO, and then days later, or about I think it was about 24 hours later, they find his body. He's been horribly mutilated, and but the whole source for the story is very dubious. You have these kinds of these guys that say that they have top secret clearance and a military record, and they say that they saw these strange documents that the U.S. government is covered up. One I think was stationed over in Great Britain, and he saw this document and he kind of committed all the details to memory, and then he's replicating it from memory. And the other guy claims to have seen the same document, but he just refers to the first guy that spoke of this. So it's all very suspicious to say the least. And but it's a good story and it's fun, and I couldn't let that story go because after all it's here, it's in New Mexico, and it's one of the human mutilation cases, one of the few ones out there, and I had to talk about it.
And it was a great story. But I mean, can you imagine being that one guy who actually saw it? And then 80 years later, people are like, oh, the sources are dubious. You can't, but
Yep.
but I
And
mean, we'll get to it later. I don't want to talk about it right now. But
okay.
I have seen some stuff, and I talked about it on my own podcast or on this podcast. But this whole was it in White Sands, right? Yeah, it was in White
That's
Sands.
right. Yep.
So I'm kind of let me just skip to this part. I made it like a little outline that we would talk about for listeners, and one of them is about White Sands and the Trinity site where they detonated the first nuclear bomb. Would detonating a nuclear bomb attract the type of creatures that would want to mutilate those that detonated the nuclear bomb? Is
Well,
that
that's
connected at all? I mean, is New Mexico like a hive of, you got Roswell, which for listeners, if you've never been to New Mexico, you've got the Tularosa Basin where the White Sands are. And you got the Trinity site 80 miles north of White Sands. Still, I guess that's actually in the Jornado del Muerte, but they kind of merged together there at the end.
that's right.
And then I don't know how many miles, maybe 180 miles east over an enormous mountain range. I learned today the most southern mountain range that has alpine forests,
Mm.
the Sacramento Mountains, I hope,
Mm,
Sierra
mhm.
Blanca and
That's right.
Ruidoso.
Yep.
So a certain amount of miles on the other side near Roswell, the famous Roswell, they had the supposed crash, and it was only years after we detonated the bomb. And then from then on, you've got the what is the band? Foo Fighters. You've got all
Yep.
the stuff that the biggest podcaster in the world talks about that we don't even talk about. Are they?
Yep.
Do you feel like there's maybe a connection if you detonate a nuclear bomb and it opens up something or it does something to maybe the psyche or actual physical or interdimensional? I don't want to get into that, but like, is there a connection? I kind of
You
do want to get into it, but
Yeah.
I'm not Joe Rogan, so I don't want to get into it. I just think it's
Okay.
neat. But like, I
Yeah.
want to hear
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop talking. I want to hear your perspective on nuclear bomb, and then immediately after, or was it before? No, it was after. Um, a man gets abducted in White
Yeah.
Sands.
Yep. And it's also interesting because of course, you brought up the famous Roswell incident, but if you research that one, you find out that the actual crash was much further to the west of Roswell than a lot of people think. It was actually closer to Corona, and which is much closer to that Tularosa Basin in the Sacramento Mountains, and it's so that's interesting. It's everything kind of converges in that central New Mexico location. But to answer your question, yeah, I mean that's the consensus has been out there. Many people have talked about it that that first detonation of the nuclear weapons in 1945, the atomic bomb. That was a signal. It was it reverberated wherever around the universe and other dimensions and other times, whatever you want to say, and that something was watching, something saw it and decided that we had suddenly become very interesting and decided to come and investigate. And that was one of the stories about with this horror at Holloman Air Force Base and the human mutilation that happened there. Was that this was only maybe 10 or so, maybe 11 years after the detonation of the atomic bomb, and perhaps it took that long for whatever they were to come and really start investigating in earnest. But at that time, they were. I think one of the theories that I kind of posited, again, maybe tongue in cheek, was that these the UFO knots, as some call them, decided to come and kind of investigate, and whoever these strange two-legged creatures were that detonated this weapon that they weren't supposed to have, decided to suck them up into the hold of their UFO and kind of poke around there and see what he was made of, and do a kind of a little investigate, a little vivisection there, and see how it worked. And then I kind of think I said something about we haven't seen too many of those lately, maybe because they started to see that was unethical. Maybe this was still early and they didn't realize that we had maybe an intelligence, if you want to call it that,
Well,
although
the
somewhat.
syndicate met with them and asked them to
Yeah,
just use cows instead of humans, if
that's
you
right. And I think
believe the cigarette smoking man, right?
that's right. That's the other theory. I think that's probably a better one, that they said no. They finally made a treaty and a deal with the humans and said no, you can abduct and mutilate the cows. We got plenty of cows and you can go after them, but leave the humans alone. So, but yeah, it's an interesting theory. It kind of makes you wonder: was there a connection between the atomic bomb? Possibly, but I like to think that the connection between the Southwest and the American West and all these strange events actually predates that, and maybe it really doesn't have anything to do with that at all. Maybe it's just kind of a coincidence. After that, we really entered the atomic age, and that great leap in technology that occurred after the Second World War, and also our population exploded. More people were moving out west, and there was just more people seeing these things and reporting on them. Because you go far enough back into the records, and you see accounts that are definitely predate the detonation of the atomic bomb. They're fewer and further between, but they're definitely there. Something was happening. Strange things have been going on out here for a very long time. And I like to think it's something about the land itself and the ancient civilizations that existed here, and maybe the loosening of the boundaries between our world and some other time or dimension or universe or whatever you want to call it. Maybe that goes back much further, back to the Chacoans, or who knows, other civilizations that may have existed here that we know nothing of. At least that's the way I like to think of it.
I absolutely do too. And actually, your brother took me to a site in the Galisteo Basin
Mm-hmm.
with the largest Avanyu, I think it's
Yes.
Avanyu,
Mm-hmm.
in the Southwest, which is a giant snake like eel looking snake like creature that is I would call it analogous to maybe Quetzalcoatl,
Mm-hmm.
but not. And it was in the Galisteo Basin, only like an hour from my house, and that kind of ties into the episodes you did over the in the Jornada del Muerte,
Mm-hmm.
the giant snake beast that came from the volcano or some volcano. We don't, I guess, know what volcano, but some volcano and snatched some old Spaniards up, I think.
That's yep. That's the San Marshal serpent. And yeah, that was an interesting one. Now that's a story that, as I was just kind of talking about, that definitely predates the modern age. That one goes back to the kind of the old tall tales that you find in the newspapers, going all the way back into the real Wild West back in the 1800s. And it's a strange story. It's a curious story, but there was the claim that they someone was attacked by a huge serpent that was out there, and it was said to have kind of appeared from an old extinct volcano that's out there. And the interesting thing about that one is it's actually in the same area as the as the where the atomic bomb was first detonated, the
The
Trinity
Trinity
area.
site, yeah.
That's right. And I think I kind of, again, tongue in cheek, I just kind of suggest that maybe the government was kind of using the weapon to destroy whatever was there. So, which of course is just ridiculous, but
That's fun
but
though.
it's fun. It's fun to think about those things. And so yeah, and so that's one of those kind of taller tales that you hear, and that's again one of the interesting things. It's newspapers.com is it's a great resource, but you kind of go on there and search all those old 19th century newspapers, and you just find the absolute strangest story. There's another one I wrote about where there's, an iguanodon. There was a dinosaur that was found in the Mojave, and they talk about that, and they're citing a professor from out east. There's European authorities. They've got a scientific name.
I will say
That's written in there.
there's often European authorities that find their way into these old
It's
papers.
amazing.
Or one time Argentinian authority.
Yep.
Oh, the newest one, that was the bat one, yeah. Or the no, I'm sorry, the bat squatch.
The bat squatch. Yep. So it's interesting how they kind of they start to kind of make their appearance. But those tales are fun, and you kind of find all kinds of strange stories in there. I did another one that was really just about kind of old tales from the newspapers, and I think that was Space Invaders from Mars or something like that. I call it kind of
Yes, yeah.
harkening back to kind of like the old pulp lurid stories. But that one had, oh, I mean, one story was, one came by way of like it was a French newspaper talking about things that were going on in America, and you can find the old story, but it's only in French. But it talks about some geologists in around James Peak up in Colorado finding this like enormous geode, in the mountain, but it actually came from Mars, and there was like a strange creature embedded in it, and it had hieroglyphics and strange technology. I mean, it's great stuff. And then, you know,
Incredible. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull stuff. It's great.
yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
great. I mean, it's just like the whole idea that this thing was launched from, of course they just call it Mars, but it could be any
Yeah, they meant like anywhere in the solar system.
exactly anywhere in the solar, anywhere, so it's just aliens in general. So that was kind of an interest. And then there was another one that was one of the earliest, as far as I know, abduction stories, or at least it was an attempted abduction. In this case, the individual wasn't actually abducted, but this one took place in California, and he was
Oh,
kind of
that's right.
yeah,
That was a good one.
he was kind of clattering along on his carriage, his horse and buggy there, and some strange aliens that were very lightweight and seemed to defy gravity, but they had no muscle or weight to them. They tried to abduct him and try to carry him off, but it didn't work because they were so lightweight. And of course, the inference was they were Martians. And so you get these weird, and of course, the famous Aurora, Texas incident, which is supposed to be, kind of like the Roswell before Roswell. Which, if you ask me, I think it was just the Texans trying to kind of horn in on that territory. But
Well, they like to do that sometimes.
yeah, they do, and I don't blame them.
No offense to my Texas listeners, of course.
Of course not. And so that was it. Those are just kind of interesting stories that you find. So I'm going to continue to do that. Just kind of cull through the old 19th century newspaper accounts and see what they've got, because there's always something fun to be found there.
So that's what you use. What was it called? Like newspaper dot, what was it?
One that I use, yeah, it was called newspapers.com, and
And it
it's
just has
amazing.
a vast trove of old
Just
newspapers?
old newspapers have been digitized and put on there, and you can just find the strangest. You can find cryptids and strange accounts of UFOs and not not just in the old west, of course, and you can find them all around the world. But it's just the weirdest stuff. There was, of course, one that I have yet to write about, and I'd like to do it at some point, was the famous airship scare that happened in the 1890s. And actually, the first account of that, which again I'd like to discuss when I finally get around to writing that article.
Well,
But
you must. You must discuss it. You
well, here
must
I'll
write an article about it.
I'll definitely do that. But I'll give you the scoop right here on your podcast. But there was the first account of or the first sighting of the one of these strange airships was in the Galisteo Basin, right here in New Mexico. And it was reported in the Santa Fe New Mexican back in the I believe it was in the late 1880s. But later, the more famous accounts come from the latter 1890s, and they come from San Francisco, and then they start to kind of make their way further east. I think kind of eventually ending up in Texas. But yeah, the first one was right here in New Mexico. It always, and that's the thing. If you go into it, wherever you are in these stories, wherever you are in the American West, it always comes back to New Mexico, one way or another. It always comes back to New Mexico, and kind of that, the Four Corners region. There's always a connection there somewhere, which I find to be very fascinating.
Aren't you happy to like live here? We both live in New Mexico, so this is great. Like we're in the epicenter of weirdness.
it's it's great. I mean, that's the one thing, and everywhere you go, everywhere you're driving, you're guaranteed to kind of see something very strange in New Mexico. Just like you said, it's kind of the epicenter of high strangeness in the American West.
So I know the two. What is? Man, I'm blanking out right now. I'm really embarrassed about it. Between the San Sangre de Cristos and the San Juans is the basin with Snippy,
Oh, the San Luis Valley.
San Luis Valley. You could pretty much trace that as the same valley down almost to Tularosa. It kind of splits because
Oh
the
yeah.
the Hernando de Morto, you can take that to the east and go into the. So there's like a corridor almost of
Mhm.
weird stuff that goes on in the American Southwest. And I think the first reported lights in the sky is in the San Luis Valley. At
The
least
San
that's
Luis.
what the, the watchtower said.
Well, if the Watchtower said it, I definitely believe it. It has to be true.
It's got 100% true. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because the San Luis Valley is, you have to visit it. If you've never been there, you got to go. You got to see it to believe it. It's a fascinating place, and you're absolutely right. That's everything kind of clusters right around there, and it seems to be what you're talking about there. It seems to be almost follow the Rio Grande. I mean, of all things, because
Exactly. Yeah.
the Rio Grande originates, as you know, up in the San Juans, and it kind of hooks off to the east, goes right through the San Luis Valley, comes down through New Mexico, all the way right out there, and falls along through the Texas border and empties out into the Gulf of Mexico. And it's that whole area is, as you say, particularly going through Colorado, New Mexico. It's just high strangeness central. And I wrote a few articles about the San Luis Valley, and I intend to write many more to come. But there's so much to say about the real authority on that one is the late Christopher O'Brien, and he wrote several books about it, which I recommend. They're quite interesting. But he was the authority on the San Luis Valley, and he just went around collecting all kinds of data on what was going on there, and it's fascinating stuff. There's everything goes. There's Sasquatch or Bigfoot sightings. There's, of course, numerous UFO sightings. There's the first, uh, mutilation, cattle mutilation. Although in this case, it was a horse, Snippy,
Snippy, poor Snippy.
and poor Snippy. But so there's so many, and there's strange supernatural tales that go through there. So it's a fascinating place. I think I opened up my whole Substack on that one with the kind of the phantom horses of the Great Sand Dunes, which is kind of a strange story. They're kind of like web-footed horses that are said to live on the sand dunes, and if you hear them, you they might they kind of come out on moonlit nights, and if you chase after them, thinking you're gonna get one, instead they get you. And so it's almost kind of like the water horse in the Celtic countries. They kind of had a very similar story, which is interesting, I thought. But
Extremely interesting, actually. Yeah,
it's a
really,
very similar
really
story, but of
cool.
course, very different geographical areas, obviously. And the San Luis Valley, it used to be this almost kind of like an inland sea, this enormous lake that was there, and you wonder about these things that are here in the Southwest. I mean, there's all these ancient geological features. There's that Rift Valley of the Rio Grande, just kind of
I
tunneling
was
its way.
going to bring
Yep.
that up
Yep.
because when you think about the Grand Canyon, the
Hmm.
Colorado Plateau lifted up while the Colorado River flowed through it and it carved through it.
Hmm.
The Rio Grande, the earth tore itself apart
Hmm.
and the water goes where the land tore itself apart. It was not, the Rio
Yep.
Grande was not created from
Hmm.
carving through it. The land itself tore itself apart and the
Yep.
Rio Grande goes there. And so, I mean, it's a little different than just having a canyon. This
Hmm.
is the land tore itself apart. And I'm not trying to
Yep.
be goofy, but what was in the land? But no, no.
Well.
But I mean, there's a lot of sightings around these rift valleys where the land tore itself apart. Like there was a
Yep.
violent
Yep.
separation of the earth,
Hmm.
and there could be something to it. Don't matter.
Absolute.
It's not going to affect our afterlife, but it's really fun right now. I love to learn about it. But yeah, I'm sorry for interrupting. Yeah,
Well, no, that's glad you brought that up, because that is one of the interesting. It is that great, that violence of the earth that's here. And it's that Rift Valley, just like you say, it's tearing itself apart, and it kind of, in some places, it intersects with kind of like a transverse. Kind of lineament, that's, or something like that, or some kind of a rift valley, kind of like, for instance, with the Jemez Mountains. For those that don't know, it's an enormous volcano. It's a mountain range, but it's really just a gigantic volcano. And that's the thing that a lot of people, I certainly didn't when I first came out to New Mexico, is how volcanic it is here. There's volcanoes everywhere. So there's that element, as you say, of violence, and the earth kind of turning itself inside out. And speaking of the story there about the Taos Plateau, and the volcanism that's there, one of the stories that I wrote about, I called it the incident at Pot Mountain. And it was a very strange story that happened, maybe about, I believe it was in 2019, so it wasn't too long ago. And
I
that
regret to say I have not listened to it yet, but yeah,
well, you'll have
I
to check
will.
that. Yeah, you'll have to check
I
that one out.
will.
It's a great story. It's one of my favorites, and it involves, there's a series of, I don't know if I'm sure you've been up there, but San Antonio Mountain, and it's
I
up there.
have, yes, sir.
Yes, and it's, there's these enormous shield volcanoes that are there, these big kind of domes. And this one's called Cerro de la Hoya, or Pot Mountain, and it's a lower one than the larger San Antonio Mountain. But some hunters were up there, and around, I believe it was Labor Day weekend in 2019, and they were elk hunting. And one of the guys was up at the very top of this Pot Mountain, and it was in the morning, and he saw these strange figures, uh, tall human-like figures, but he couldn't make out any kind of features or faces. They almost looked like they were wearing, giant hoods or cowls or something like that. And he kind of made an illustration of that. And he, it kind of took him by surprise, and I think he turned away for a minute and looked back, and they were gone. But they were these enormous, I forget what the height of them was, but much far larger than any human being would be. And it kind of freaked him out, as I think it would. And he goes back and tells his buddy about it, and of course they just kind of laughed it off. And so then the following day, I think they'd kind of done what they were going to do, didn't find any elk, and they were leaving. And so they were driving on kind of an access road around this Pot Mountain. As they came around, I think as they kind of came around the shoulder of the mountain, they saw this something, some kind of a structure. And I think that at the time they were just kind of surprised by it, and they thought it was a tent, a large, almost like a circus tent. But I think they were thinking it was more of like a film tent, because there's all the filming that goes on in New Mexico. And then they kind of went down a dip in the road and then came back up and it was gone. And it's a strange story. What was it? What was it that they were seeing there? And they didn't see anything else. They came out and they seemed like pretty sober, matter of fact guys, just two kind of grizzled hunters. And there's just something to me about the story that kind of had that kind of ring of truth to it. It seemed like something that they were just, they didn't know what to make of what they're seeing. And, if you've ever kind of had any encounters with these things, you kind of have that same feeling. It's like, what am I seeing? You start groping for some other explanation, something else in your experience that kind of matches it. In this case, thinking it was maybe just a film set. But what was that? Was that again, I think I kind of speculate in that article. Had to do with the volcanism? Was it a loosening of the kind of the boundaries there? Were they seeing it? Was it a glimpse? Was it like a time slip? Were they seeing a glimpse of the past or the future? It's strange. And I mentioned also in the article that it was on that very same weekend. My brother and I were heading up to climb Mount Shavano up in Colorado, and on both days we happened to pass by that same area. Not at the same time that these guys claim that it happened, but I remember on the first day, and we were going up. It's when this guy had the encounter with the two figures on top of the mountain. We were passing up there, and a ferocious thunderstorm was passing through there. And I remember seeing, a couple of strikes of lightning out there in the vicinity of Pot Mountain. I just wonder, was there something going on? Was there kind of a rift opening up? I mean, I don't know. It's strange stuff, and it's fun to think about.
It's a lot of fun to think about. Where is Pop Mountain?
It's just a little south of the Colorado border, and it's quite close out on the kind of on the edge of the Rio Grande Gorge. It's further out there. It's further east of San Antonio Mountain, due west of Taos, and so
Okay,
it
okay. I think I
so
know what it is. Yeah,
yeah, I'm sure you've seen it. So if you'll see
it's
these,
south of the big one,
yep,
Antonio, or
yep, San
yeah.
Antonio Mountain. So
It's
it's
okay. So it's
just
the one south of that.
it's south,
Okay.
yeah, so it's southeast of that. It's the second largest one after that you'll see.
Okay. All right.
It's not as dramatic as kind of another one is Ute Mountain, which is a very small one, but
Yes.
it has
Yeah.
that dramatic relief. That's on the other side. That's on the eastern side of the rift. But this one's on the western side with San Antonio Mountain. But it is the second
And this is
largest.
all south of San Luis Valley.
It's south of San Luis Valley. But if you talk to some people,
It's
and I agree with them.
includes it.
Yes, I would say San Luis Valley probably ends at kind of right where you come out of when you're heading up to Taos, and you kind of you kind of come out to that spectacular view, and you can see the whole the Rio Grande
Oh yeah.
Gorge in front of
Oh
you.
yeah.
That I would say is probably the southern boundary of the San Luis Valley, and the northern boundary. You can see it on a map where it just kind of like it's up by a Salida up in Colorado. And
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
so that's what. So I would say, of course we put the arbitrary. A lot of people just kind of have the San Luis Valley as being in Colorado, but
It
in
goes
point of
way further.
yeah, in
Way
point of
further.
fact, it definitely is in New Mexico. And so it
Oh yeah.
includes. And when you read Christopher O'Brien's books about the San Luis Valley, he talks, of course, all about northern New Mexico and that whole area too.
Well, I'm gonna have to read those books now. I'll tell you that.
Definitely.
But you mentioned something when you were talking about when you see something that you can't explain and also can't deny.
Yes.
So I'm gonna plug my own story here for a little bit. I've told
Nice.
it on the podcast. I don't remember when. I actually think it was like the Ancient Ones series, possibly over the Neighbors, Chaco and Neighbors, like the Mogollon. I think I was talking about. But I was driving. I camped at oh shoot, Homolovi State Park,
Mhm.
which is in Arizona, right on I-40, and Holbrook or Winslow? No, Holbrook. So I was. Oh no, I actually think it is Winslow. Oh shoot, let me look it up. I don't want to talk on my butt here. Okay, Homolovi is just north of Winslow and I-40, and south of Winslow is New Mexico or Arizona 87. So I was moving from Wisconsin to Orange County, California. I got married to my wife, and then like 2 weeks later, I moved in. So she was in LA. We bought a place in Orange County, but I didn't move in until after I got married. So I moved all my stuff from Wisconsin all the way to Orange County, California. And I stopped in Oklahoma, and then I stopped in Winslow, just north of Winslow, Arizona, at Homolovi State Park. And Homolovi State Park is a Anasazi, Ancestral Puebloan, whatever you want to call them, ancient ones. I just ended up talking because no matter what phrase you say, someone gets angry. Anasazi's wrong. Ancestral Puebloans are wrong. But I stayed at the Homolovi State Park. Most of the Pueblo was washed away when the nearby creek or river or whatever overflowed and moved its boundaries, and they all washed into the river. A lot of Mormon colonies also did the same thing on the same river, actually. But so I stayed at Homolovi State Park, woke up before sunrise, and I was driving south on 87 with my dog, and my truck was full of all my stuff. And so before I was going to Phoenix, or actually Coolidge, my friend's parents, I was going to go visit my friend because he was staying with his parents for that weekend. And my friend's parents live across the street from Casa Grande National Monument. They can see the roof of the Hohokam structure from their front yard. And so I was going to Coolidge, Arizona. And I started it before sunrise, packed up everything. We were driving down. I get to 87. It kind of climbs up a little bit when it gets to the Mogollon Rim. And then as it climbs up, it goes from desert, when you go to like Petroglyph National or Petroglyph Forest, like National Park or whatever it's called. It gets that painted desert and it slowly turns into like kind of alpine, a lot of trees, more green, there's grass. I'm going up and I pass a sign that says elk crossing. And I'm like, oh, cool. I like elk. And then not a mile later, I had to slow down. I mean, the sun was up just enough. Wasn't quite up yet, but it was up just enough for me to see actual elk crossing. So I slowed down and my dog's sleeping. And he was an old dude. He was sleeping in the back seat. Very little room because it was all packed. But I like tapped him. I was like, hey, Echo, like, look at this, man. Look at this. He got up, looked at him. We were looking at these elks cross, about 15 cross, 20 cross. And then the largest male elk, like elk bull, I assume is what they're called, jumps the fence and is looking south. And I'm driving south, so he's not looking at me. And I'm sitting there in the car and he's walking across and then he turns to me and he does not have an elk face. It is an elongated human face, man face, eyes facing forward, no nose, no snout, I guess. And the jaw was hanging down, like a grotesque horror movie from like the early 2000s. Only by like one ligament it looked like. So it was just dangling and drip and lots of drool. Tons of drool were dripping. And so all the hairs in the back of my neck stood up. And only thing I could do was turn the music down because I just had to like look at it. I'm blasting music. It's early in the morning. I'm trying to stay awake. And I turned the music down all the way down. And this elk looks at me. I'm looking at him. I didn't look at my dog, but I heard his tail hitting the stuff in the back seat because it was so full. The tail stopped hitting the stuff. Like he saw it. I saw it. He takes like 2 steps, continually looking at me with his man eyes, flat face, slack hanging jaw, full of, and it doesn't quite describe it because I'm trying to describe it in ways that equate to like our language, but it was not an elk or a human face. It was just a creature. The whole elk was beautiful. He had huge antlers, but his face was not right. He was looking at me. I turned the music down and I stared at him for a while. He took a couple steps staring at me the whole time. He was now at the other side of the yellow line. I picked up my phone to take a video because I was like, I have to get this on video. It's right there in my little on my left in the door. Picked up my phone. He looked at me and he shook his head. He was like, nope. Just violently shook his head. And the whole time he shook his head, his like lower jaw, which was only like hanging, I can't describe, only hanging by like one side, just violently shook back and forth, just drool flipping everywhere, flinging everywhere. And I was like, so I put my phone down and he walked across the road, turned away from me, jumped over the fence, ran off. That was it. He was gone. I, as soon as I got to my friend's parents' house in Coolidge, which, you know, I was above the Mogollon line, so I still had like 3 more hours to go. The whole time I was horrified, but also I just saw something I shouldn't have seen. And even my dog was very, when he got to my friend's house, who he'd been there before, very scared. He was not happy. We were both like, this was not natural or good what we just saw. And I will never forget it. I told my friends, I stayed with them a couple hours, then I drove from, southern Phoenix to Orange County, California, still thinking about it. As soon as I got to my house with my brand new wife, I didn't even tell her like, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you." I tried to tell her the story first. I was like, "This is a story that I never want to tell again, but I've told it like 15 times since, and I don't think I should have. I think I'm breaking some sort of barrier. That's something that you just don't talk about because before this, I didn't believe. I didn't, and we should talk about this in a little bit. I did not believe. I fell into I wouldn't say curse, but I fell into the modern belief of all that is done, all that is gone. There ain't nothing like that anymore. All those stories, all the superstitions, they're gone. The monsters, they're not we have progressed as a human being past them. I no longer believe that. And I think that we have just ignored or been too populated to see it. But as soon as you get out in the wild, as soon as you get out to where there's nobody and you're by yourself or you're with your dog, you start to change your attitude. And now, recent things that have happened in the world, I've really started to change. I think we have forgotten that the unnatural world is part of the natural world. And I'll hand the floor to you.
Well, that's a great story. I love it. And it's, I agree with everything you just said. I've had kind of the same evolution in my own thinking. I was kind of in the same situation. Very scientific. I kind of thought these things weren't real. There was no possibility. Everything had been kind of cataloged and discovered, and certainly there were new things to find here and there. But as far as anything that might be considered paranormal, supernatural, I was always interested in it, loved it. But it was that idea that no, these things aren't real. They're fun to think about, but no, that's not what really happens. But yes, I think I agree completely with particularly things that have happened recently, and the more I've been out here in the West, the more I've been out here in the Southwest and seen things of my own. It's hard to kind of have that same attitude, and there's things out there. There's things that we can't explain. Many people have talked about this, but you really have to see it to believe it. And when you're out here in the West, you're out here, on a dark night, you're camping out there, you hear things out in the distance, or you see, a strange light up on a mountain peak where there shouldn't be one, where no one should be there, no one could be there, and you just kind of wonder, what is that? Is there somebody up there? Is there something going on? And you start to wonder what these things are. I mean, I've had my own experiences seeing strange things in the sky, which I grew up in Florida, never saw anything there. But as soon as I got here, I mean, literally within, I would say, a year of moving out to New Mexico, I saw strange things up in the sky. And, once you see that, it's kind of hard to go back to that old way of thinking.
I 100% agree. I grew up in Georgia. I never saw anything strange. I lived in Oklahoma for a long time. I saw maybe a couple strange things, but they were, you just, what do you, you think them away. You just say, that wasn't what I saw. Never saw nothing strange in Wisconsin, but I moved out here, and yeah, almost immediately. Even before I moved here. I mean, that story was when I was moving to California, but even before I moved here, I think I know my listeners know this, but I used to travel when I lived in Oklahoma and then Wisconsin for 2 weeks out of the year to the Four Corner area. I fell in love with it, and so the longer I stayed out here by myself, it was always by myself, the more I heard or saw or just even just felt. And if you don't go through that yourself, it's extremely easy to dismiss it away. And I did my entire life, even though I grew up loving sci-fi, I grew up loving X-Files and all that kind of stuff. Read all the books that came out in the 90s about all the fun stuff. But once you finally experience it or see it, you're like, oh no, it's not fiction. I mean, certainly you can't say it's aliens, or you can't say it's a bat squatch or even a skinwalker, which I would claim when I saw, but I don't know if it was a real skinwalker as in the actual definition of the word. But I saw something that shouldn't have been there, and I shouldn't have seen it, and he didn't want me to record it. And yeah, I knew you grew up in Florida because I know you and your brother, but my mother once told me about, she never saw it, but her uncle that she used to stay with, her aunt and uncle, she used to stay with near Tampa, I think, or somewhere. Uh, he swears to this day, last time I saw him, I brought my wife to Georgia a year and a half ago. He swears this day he saw a stink ape in Florida. Saw the handprints on the sand and then saw him in the brush. You know the stink ape, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think we're also the skunk ape too that they have that's there,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
it's I actually have a book that was it was written by it was all about the various sightings in Florida, some of which is fascinating. It was areas that I grew up in. Just to go on a kind of a digression about that, but it was talks a
We
lot
love
about the
digressions on the American
yes
Side
we do.
podcast.
It talks about the skunk ape. It talks about something called I think it was called like the Moss Man. It was kind of like this, or the Spanish moss monster. It was like this humanoid creature made up of Spanish moss, or
Okay,
the
so they did
crocodile.
make an X-Files episode out of that. They did.
Exactly, and so it was all kinds of things that apparently that people have seen there. But yeah, it's fascinating stuff. But yes, I mean, once I came out into the Southwest, and you start to kind of encounter these things. I mean, I talk about it in my my Substack, but in some of the stories. But one thing that was strange, there's been a lot of sightings. If you kind of do some research about some of the UFO sightings here in New Mexico and southern Colorado, and also this is mentioned in reports from the San Luis Valley. There's kind of a I don't know. It's kind of like a cylindrical type of UFO that's seen many times, and it was a couple of years ago. I think it was in 2021. There was actually a flight recording. There was a transmission there where a pilot of a commercial airliner talked about seeing something that almost looked like a cruise missile that nearly struck their plane. And I write about that, and here I call it. I think I call it like the Clayton sighting or something like that. It was near Clayton, New Mexico, the Clayton UAP I call it. And what was interesting about that one is when I think it was maybe about a year after I had moved out here, broad daylight. It was a beautiful day. I think it was in October, but I was driving on the relief route in Santa Fe, 599, and I just happened to come out under an overpass, and I looked up, and it was one of those weird things where if I hadn't been just looking in the right direction at the right time, purely by happenstance, I just
Mhm,
saw this
mhm.
this kind of strange, I would call it a cylindrical object that was moving at an incredible rate of speed. I couldn't tell whether it was something that was moving at a very fast rate of speed and was far away, or it was something that was smaller and closer and not moving quite as fast. But it must. I believe it was something that was moving at a high rate of speed and was far up in the in the atmosphere, and it was you know, blue sky, broad daylight, and I just kind of I did one. I was driving, of course. I looked around at to see when any other drivers were reacting to it. It was kind of one of those things like, did anybody even, did anyone else see that? And it was one of those things where it happens so fast that it's almost like you start to kind of doubt yourself whether you actually saw it. You start to almost kind of like it almost kind of erases itself from your memory because you start to kind of like forget the details. But when it happened, it was extremely vivid. And so every time I hear about one of these cylindrical UFO sightings, I always think back to that. And another one I had, that one I was by myself, but I also had an encounter that my brother saw. We were actually driving back from Pagosa Springs, which is up in southern Colorado, about 3 hours from Santa Fe. And we spent the day up there and hiking and just kind of enjoying it. But it was late September, and we were coming back through the Abiquiu area, or the Ghost Ranch area. It was near a place called Echo Amphitheater, and it was around 9 o'clock at night. And I was driving. My brother, I think, was just kind of looking at his phone, and I was just kind of there was no one else around. It's a very remote stretch of road, and there was no one else on the road at that time. No one behind us, no one in front of us. And I think I was just kind of paying attention to some of the mice that kept kind of darting out from the side of the road, and they would kind of like run out into the middle of the road and run back. And I was just kind of looking at that, but then my attention it wasn't anything sudden. It wasn't like that. I just something kind of blinked into existence or caught my attention. It was just suddenly there, and I just noticed it. And it looked just like in the same size and the same appearance as the full moon if you saw it kind of behind a light overcast. So it was kind of fuzzy, but you could see it a disc, exact same size and appearance and light as the full moon, but just kind of fuzzy, kind of obscured. And I thought, I think I said to my brother, I said, Is that the moon?" And he looked up from his phone. He said, "I hope so." and and it took me a while to I didn't realize at the time, but when we had driven up that morning around 11 in the morning, kind of passing through the same area, the moon was there. It was in the exact same area, but it was a half moon. And of course, here we are, how many ever hours later it was at night. The moon was on the other side of the earth at that time. It definitely was not the moon. It wasn't in the right phase. So that's not what it was. The strangest thing. And we both looked at it. And right after my brother looked up and saw it and said, I hope it's the moon. Um, it kind of did this strange, movement. It just kind of, it almost like it was a very distinct disc. I mean, I can't stress enough that it looked just like the full moon, but it just almost kind of like flowed like a liquid, and it just went in this kind of like zigzag shape and then disappeared straight down into the ground. And I don't know what to make of it. I mean, at the time, I was trying to rationalize it. Was it someone over there in the Echo Amphitheater area flashing a flashlight on the canyon wall? Well, of course not. I mean, that wouldn't create a perfect disc. So it would create some kind of an oval. It would all be, the image would be cut by the irregularities in the cliff face. So it was the strangest thing. I don't know what it was, and I can't explain it. Neither can my brother. And it's just a very strange sighting, and that's in an area that I think when I wrote about that particular incident, I think I called it "Aliens Over Abiquiu." Um, there's been a lot of sightings in that area, and a lot of them are of a very similar object, this kind of indistinct discs. Was this an actual object? Was it some kind of form of energy? But the strangest thing was that it seemed to be observing us, even as we observed it, and it seemed to want to get our attention because it's the weirdest feeling, Thomas, because, I didn't see it come into existence. I was looking ahead the whole time. It was just kind of there suddenly, but I didn't notice when it suddenly appeared. But it waited for me to see it. It waited for me to say something to my brother. It waited for him to look up. And literally within a split second of him looking up and seeing it, it was just like it did this kind of little pirouette and then it was gone. So it's like it wanted us to see it. you know?
And for anyone who, by the way, incredible story.
Hmm.
For anyone who has not driven on that road, it's not 550, it goes up to Chama.
Yeah.
That highway, if someone were shining a light on the sandstone walls, there are trees in the way, and the sandstone walls are not that smooth. It's not like Utah smooth. So it's not gonna be a perfect oval.
That's it. That's exactly, and I was trying to, it was weird because I look back at it now and I thought how ridiculous it was, but I was trying to rationalize it like, well, maybe someone was flashing some sort of a light. Like, you would have a perfectly smooth wall, and that,
Which
well,
don't exist.
which
Maybe
don't.
in the top of amphitheater, Echo Amphitheater, but that's been closed for 2 years now for some
Well,
reason,
it's
by the way.
yeah, I know. I don't know what that's all about. But yeah, it was like it was like the most ridiculous attempt at rationalization because, you know, it,
That's what
it
you
would
have to
be,
do. You have
you,
to
you
rationalize it
do.
when you see something like that.
You
You
do.
can't say, "Oh, what I just saw is completely incredible and strange and, out of this world, so I believe it immediately." No, you have to be like, "No, what I just saw was this or this."
Yep.
And yeah,
It's
that's yeah.
and that's what I look back and I'm like, "Oh, what was I thinking even saying that?" But, I just felt the need to come up with some sort of explanation, and they're
You
just,
have to.
you do, and once you start thinking about it, it's like, that's no, it's exactly what you thought it was when you first saw it. You
Like,
know
with
what?
the elk, I was like, "He got his face shot off." And I
Yeah.
was like, "No, why were his eyes forward if he got
Yep.
his face shot off?" He got in a fight with an elk and it tore half his head off. Well, why were his I don't know.
Yep. No, when you see it and you know it, you gotta trust your gut because it's telling you something, and you know that you've seen something you've seen something strange. And, it's interesting, you saw that in that, Mogollon Rim and in that whole area. They see things like that all the time. I think I did have an article about that, about some strange, they're strange kind of half human hybrid, creatures. One was kind of like a, I mean, just sounds ridiculous, but it was like a horse, uh, kind of horse creature that was seen up on the kind of Black Mesa there in Hopi Land. And, they see that, they have stories about this all the time, or things that you see kind of in the Lucachukais there, and on the border with Arizona. So it's not unusual. There's things that are seen, and of course, if you talk to my brother, he can tell you all kinds of stories that the Hopis have, very strange stories that they relate, and those will make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up.
Yes, they do. I've yet to talk about those even though I have a book over them. Some of them are too close to home for
Mm.
what I saw.
That's right.
Another when you were telling the story, I kind of I've been to Ghost Ranch. I've hiked the, Kitchen Mesa Trail, which is an amazing trail. Goes up through the valley and then up the top of the mesa or the side, and then you go up on the top. Why is it called Ghost Mesa? Do you know? Because I do not.
Well, as a matter of fact, glad you asked, because yeah, I did. I didn't know either. I had no clue why that was the case. But once did some research, it turned out it was kind of a name for, there was, and I forget the exact name. Let me see if I can find that was here. I think it was called there was a certain, area in there that the reason they call it Ghost Mesa is, in the original Spanish, I think the idea was something like the witches, or the place of the witches. And or brujas, or actually in this case I think it was brujos. It was the male version, so they were talking kind of about, yes, I think it was El Rancho de los Brujos, kind of like the ranch of the sorcerers. And what it was essentially, some cattle rustlers and, banditos were kind of using those, box canyons to, to hide their ill-gotten gain. And they kind of encourage these rumors that the place was haunted, to kind of keep prying eyes out of there. So that's where the name comes from. But I don't know, I that's the standard, explanation. But
There could be
y-
more to it.
I there's because in that same article I kind of looked up, and there's various sites where people just kind of report things that they've seen. And there's a lot of sightings around there. There's a lot of strange things that people have seen. So I think, that I think that may be part of it. There was some cattle rustlers that were in there, but I think I like to think that they may have been playing on older traditions that predated them, and they kind of were using those to kind of reinforce that idea. And so I think there was probably something that goes back a lot further there. I wouldn't be surprised by that at all.
Well, that's normally what happens, especially in Europe. And the Spaniards were European.
That's right.
But near Ghost Ranch in Abiquiu, you and your brother took me to some ruins, to some Guyana ruins. For the listeners, it's not quite Anasazi because they were too far east, in my opinion. Not quite ancestral Puebloans because they did not become Puebloans. But there's a group of sites west of Abiquiu, west of Ghost Ranch, where they're called the Guyana ruins. I think it's called the Nogales Cliff House.
That's it. Yep.
And I've talked about it briefly in one of my, maybe I didn't actually. Maybe I'm not there yet. No, I think I did a little bit. Those people got burnt out and they got eaten by, not all of them, of course, but a lot of them by certain people from the Mesa Verde region who came over to the Rio Grande region and set up the Pueblos. So that area has a pretty dark history with humanity, even despite the orbs and the whatever you want to call them. It's besides Ghost Ranch, it's an area that kind of seems, I don't want to say powerful, but it has some bad juju. Rattlesnake Ridge is the name of the ridge that has all the burned out towers with the people that were killed. I mean,
It's a wild place,
it's a
you know?
wild place. And that kind of brings me to what makes the Southwest and the West in general, but mostly the Southwest, like such a spooky place.
Well, and I think it kind of goes back to what you were just mentioning. I was going to bring it up, but it's this. There's an ancient history here, and really, it's the Southwest for North America is kind of like our really the whole Rio Grande Valley. It's kind of like our Mesopotamia or our Ganges cultures. I mean, it's the same thing. It's that river, and then there's those ancient cultures that cluster around it. And this is where that long standing oldest history is with the Chaco culture and the connections to Mesoamerica. And I just think this is where the lengthy human history is located. And there's, as you say, there's a lot of magic here. There's a lot of things that are going on, things that you can't explain. And there's that you can kind of feel those ghosts. Now, I'm not sure if you felt it, but I would think that you did. But when we went to Nogales Cliff House, it's it can be kind of a spooky place.
Oh, talk about the elk, the tracks.
Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, we saw some elk
Oh,
tracks
hold
that were
on. Let
going
me
up.
interrupt you real quick.
Sure.
What did we see first? We saw lion prints in the sand. And
Yep.
then we saw the elk hide sitting on the side of the trail against that tree
Yep.
next to the lion prints. And then after that, we saw the elk prints. And it felt like I'll let you tell the story.
Well, it was just kind of a strange thing because you could just see these elk prints in the sand as it was not a very lengthy hike to get back there, but you start to see these elk prints and kind of an odd place to see it. You wouldn't think that that's where it would be. And as we're kind of getting closer and closer up to these ruins, and it's in a very remote, difficult of access, area up in this kind of box canyon, and this alcove that's up there, as these cultures are wont to build their redoubts. I mean, kind of in a remote location that was easily defensible. But what was an elk doing up there? Where was it going? There's no place for it to go, and there's no outlet. There's no place where it could you would see it where it would seem to go. It was just so it was the strangest thing. And as we
And as we
went,
climbed, it got
yep.
icier and snowier.
It gets icier and snowier, and there was no indication that the elk had gone back the way that it had come. So what happened to it? You know, that was the that was kind of the question. You know, where did this thing go? And it just it kind of does make you wonder. You know, what were we really seeing? You know, once you get up into these ruins, they're very they kind of have that spooky sense. And you know, one time I went up there, and you know, you could even find what looked to be human remains, you know, just kind of eroding out of the earth. And so this is it's a very there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of history there. And you know, it does there's nowhere else in North America, certainly nowhere else in our country, I think, that really approaches that.
I absolutely agree. I was, I think it was 2020. The entire Southwest was kind of, it was in March. So it was a little early, but I mean, the entire Southwest was kind of empty because of the stuff I don't want to talk about that happened in 2020 because it was stupid. But the whole Southwest is kind of empty. And I was in Agua Fria National Monument, north of Phoenix, south of Flagstaff. And I had found these ruins on Google Earth. I assume they're maybe Mogollon, maybe Salado ruins. Anasazi, we'll just call them that. You can be mad at me in the comments. But I found these ruins, and also this ruin had a huge racetrack, where the pueblos now like do the racetracks. So it had a huge what looked like a foot racetrack on it, but a whole bunch of ruins on the side of a not quite a cliff, but a very steep downward angle to the creek below. And it wasn't the Agua Fria River; it was a different one, but they were all burnt out, completely burnt out. I've done research afterwards, but I found this place on Google Maps. I drove there. When I was driving there, I was at my friend's house, the same friends that I went to go visit in Coolidge. I stayed with them a night, and then I drove up there to go camp, and then I was going to go where I was going to go to Utah, I think next. And they were like, "Hey, be careful! Somebody just got attacked by a lion up there." And I was like, "Oh shoot! All right, I'll be careful." So I go to these ruins, middle of the day, beautiful, and I pull up right next to them. I found a whole bunch of potsherds, took pictures, put them back where, and I'm just exploring the ruins. Pull my truck up right next to the ruins, about to set up my tent, and I got a very distinct feeling that I should not set up my tent next to these ruins. And I kind of ignored it, and I put half the poles in, and then I got another feeling like you should not set your tent up right here. And I was like, all right, I'm done. I went down the hill a little bit, took more pictures, went down the hill. Sun was setting now. I think the Bradshaw Mountains are to the west, maybe. And I was going down to the creek, and I was going to set up shop there. And I pulled my truck back up to the creek so I can hear it. I get out of the truck, lion prints all over the mud, and I was like, "Oh, all right." I was done. I went back up. I went towards no, I don't think it's an I. Towards the highway between Flagstaff and Phoenix, maybe I-17. And I got kind of towards there and then parked on the top of a mountain, put my tent up, got my gun, and I was like, I'm going to sleep. It turned out to be a winning night. I didn't sleep at all that night. But you can go to places and you can just feel there is something there. My entire, 30 years of my life, I never felt that. And you think when you get older, you get more numb to that kind of stuff. But I think things have changed in my life and way I think. I'm more open to that kind of stuff now. And I think that was the first time I really thought, this is 2020. This is the first time I really thought, I better listen to this feeling in my gut. Like I should not stay here. And then I go to like ruins in Utah, and there's like a Boy Scout troop is carved into like the walls of the fallen Anasazi Pueblo and near the Monument Valley. And it's like this beautiful site. Probably shouldn't have been there, but it's a beautiful site. And like the Boy Scouts of America in 1927 carved into it. They camped there just fine, but I don't know. I couldn't do it. Something told me not to, and I didn't. I don't know. Maybe I don't mean to get on a tangent. Maybe we're getting more spiritual nowadays. Now we're realizing the scientificness was a kind of a farce. It's true. It's good to follow. Not true, but it's good to follow. But maybe
But it has its limits, right?
it has its limits, and there's a spirituality to all of us. And maybe we should start listening to it more. And maybe we should start incorporating it more into our lives instead of just, I don't mean to say this, but trust the science. Maybe we should trust our gut and the spirit more than maybe just the science.
No,
And there,
you're absolutely right. Yep. It's you see these things that it's whenever your gut tells you something like, we're kind of trespassers on these lands. These aren't our areas, and in some cases, it just seems like you kind of get that feeling that you don't belong there. So you try to be as respectful as possible, and just when you get those feelings, you got to respect it. Another thing is you go up on the high peaks, and that's you feel like you're not meant to be there. And you always, when I'm up there, when my brother's up there, we always try to kind of leave a kind of an offering up there, just to, whoever's up there, whatever might be up there, just to kind of grant you safe passage back down. And it may seem, superstitious to some, but you just you don't want to mess with those things. And I think you're absolutely right. I think, as I've kind of felt the same thing as I get older, I just realize that, science doesn't have all the answers, and there's a lot of mystery still in the world. And I think in some cases we've kind of felt that we're just trying to kind of almost create mysteries that aren't really there, just to kind of relieve the boredom. But I don't think we need to create anything. I think they're out there. There's definitely strange things afoot, particularly out here in the Southwest and the West in general. The history is ancient. The land is both ancient in one sense, and kind of as we talked about before, it's also young, in a geological sense, because you have these mountains getting pushed up. You have immense volcanic ranges, things that are getting lava, and new land being ejected from the earth, new rift valleys. So there's a lot going on. There's the kind of push and pull of that ancient land that's out here, but also that kind of those new and primal forces that are kind of, I mean, I know maybe it sounds a little hokey, or, you know, getting into that spiritual side of things, but yeah, I think that's why there's so many things happening out here. I think the East is kind of tame, it's tame and civilized, but this is still very much the Wild West.
I 100% agree. Um, I also think the mystery, not just of the Southwest, but just the mystery in general makes life that much better, makes it more exciting. We don't know everything. We can never know everything. So the mystery is fun. The mystery is exciting. And the more you accept that there is mystery out there that you'll never fully understand or get, the more fun life becomes. And also, the more you open yourself up to these kind of experiences. If you're closed minded, if you're done, if you only believe in one way and science can explain everything, if you're Scully, you're done. But if you're Mulder, the world is your oyster. Every mystery is exciting and fun, and you kind of start to experience them yourself. I hate to use pop culture like that, but, and I mean, the Chaco and Anasazi, ancestral Puebloans, whatever you want to call them, ancient ones, lived here and they left. They either went to the Rio Grande Valley, or they stayed at Hopi Pueblos, or they stayed at Zuni, or they went down to Mexico. But the Navajo, the Athabascans, came here and they avoided the spots of the ancient ones. And when something happened bad, or when something bad happened in the village to a child or to a grandchild, they would go out to these petroglyphs and peck them out of the wall. They would tear down ruins because bad spirits were there. So we are not the first ones here. The Athabascans were the first ones here after the ancient ones, and then the Spanish, and then us. So we're the last ones to be here, and we're the last ones to understand it. I mean, you talked about Ghost Ranch was called something about cattle rustlers,
That's
but
right. Yep.
maybe they were just putting on a current viewpoint of this is a bad spot because you don't want to get your cattle rustled, to an ancient thing of there are witches here or male witches here. You don't want to go there because there's bad stuff that happens there.
That's right. And maybe maybe it was kind of a warning that it wasn't just cattle that was being rustled here. It was people by who knows what, you know, and as we've seen in our
Exactly.
recent times that, you know, that kind of thing has been going on maybe. So maybe the human abductions and cattle mutilations and people mutilations, maybe that's been going on much, much longer than we know. Perhaps the ancient ones who were here, who knows? Maybe they were seeing the same sort of thing.
Well, they found a heart carving knife in Chaco. So they were abducting and carving hearts out and they were eating people. We know that.
Th-
Um, I'm going to go on a big tangent here, but is it a surprise that the, at least publicly known, number one sex trafficker in the world had his ranch in the Galisteo Basin of New Mexico? Is it surprising that the most evil man that we know of was doing weird things outside of what we know he was doing on his islands in the Galisteo Basin of New Mexico? What is it about New Mexico that draws the most wonderful people like you and I, and horrible people or horrible entities from somewhere else?
Well, you know, and it's funny you mentioned that because there's out there in the Galisteo Basin, I was there with my brother, and we were on a kind of a little field trip that was out there looking at. There's a great big basalt wall, and it looks like a, you know, an Avanyu or an Awanyu. It looks like this great serpent, almost
Yeah,
like
I
it's
think that's what I was talking about. Yeah,
that.
and by the
That's
way,
right.
it's a petroglyph. For those I didn't mention earlier, it's a petroglyph of a giant Avanyu, which is a some I would call it Quetzalcoatl, but not really. It's kind of like a southwestern version. Shoshone have it too. Also, the Mississippians have it too. But it's like a world serpent, essentially. All right, sorry.
Well, and that's, you know, and if you go out there and you look at those petroglyphs that are out there on this great, you know, basalt kind of wall that's out there, it's really an amazing geological feature. You can also see there's even also a petroglyph. There was a kind of a etching there of a UFO, which is great. And I'll probably use that illustrate one of my future articles. It's a great
Awesome,
petroglyph. Yeah, it's
awesome.
great.
I wonder
But
if I have a picture of it. I hope I do. I may not.
you
Shoot.
might. I'll have to show it to you.
Okay.
But yes, but right in that area, overlooking it is Epstein's ranch, sitting up there on that mesa.
Zorro Ranch.
Yep, and it's up there, and you can see the buildings, you can see the outbuildings, and it's just, and it's that weird juxtaposition of, you know, because we were sitting out there, you're looking at the, you know, the petroglyphs, and then you look up and you see, as you say, this kind of locus of evil that was up there, and it's just overlooking, and it's very, you know, ominous and it's sinister in that sense. It's just looming over this you know, from its this redoubt up there, and this you know, almost like a citadel, you know, kind of up on the mesa top, and like a fortress, and then, you know, down below, you know, here we are, and there's this ancient world, and there's this kind of newer evil, if you want to call it that, that's which I would, that's kind of there, and it's strange, and it's interesting you say that. I mean, what is it that is it a, is there a kind of a loosening of the boundaries between the worlds out here in the West? I kind of tend to think that there might be. Does it have to do with geological reasons or the ancient history? Is there something else entirely that goes on here that we know nothing of? What is it about this place that draws all these UFO sightings and strange cryptids and creatures? You know, some of these cryptids too. I mean, they you talk about them, and, you know, whether it's kind of the, you know, the Bigfoot or the, you know, kind of like the lake monsters. There's an idea that maybe there's some sort of a relict creature, something that a survival from the past. But a lot of the things, and a lot of the ones I talk about on my Substack there's always that other element of high strangeness, something almost supernatural about them, and it, you know, it makes you. Are you seeing something that's real, or is this something? Is this an actual physical or material being, or is it something that's, again, spiritual? You know, is it something that, you know, kind of partakes of a different substance than our material world? And you know, again, these something such as Epstein's ranch up there, the Zorro Ranch. I mean, is this, was it built there for that purpose? Because there's kind of a rift. I mean, I talk also about another thing down in Lordsburg. I call it the Lordsburg Door. Well, I don't call it that. That's the kind of name that was given to it, and it's almost like a doorway into another time or another dimension. And There's also another one that's spoken of in southern Arizona, and apparently they're all throughout the West, and particularly the Southwest. And these doorways into another time or another world that kind of let in these strange creatures, and it's fun to think about whether it's real or not. But it's just such a strange place, and it seems like there's always something new to discover here.
There always is, and there always will be. And when you talk about the ancient ones and even the Puebloans and the Hopi, their beings come through doorways in these mountaintops. So there's, in my opinion, always been this supernatural feeling in the area.
That's right. They talk about the Sipapoos, and and things like that, where that doorway where they come into our world. And
Exactly.
you hear about that about Blanca Peak. That large peak that's up there in the San Luis Valley. It's the fourth highest in Colorado, and it's this great big imposing mountain that's up there. I think it's just an incredible place, but
It is beautiful.
it's
Beautiful.
beautiful. It's just a beautiful. And if you go on the kind of the northern end of it, there's this beautiful, they call it the Huerfano Valley, and it's very, the San Luis Valley is very desolate and desert, but on the eastern side of it, it's kind of this wet, lush area. It's very beautiful and very different. And this valley that goes up there into that imposing monolithic north face of Blanca Peak, which is just this, it's almost like a wall there. But there's been and Christopher O'Brien talking about the San Luis Valley, he kind of assembled all these strange stories about that. And the Blanca Peak was said by some to be a potential contender for a Sipapu, or a place of emergence. And there's stories up there of strange things that people have seen. A white buffalo up in some lakes that are up there, and strange
No
fish.
way.
Yep, there's a guy that tells a story. I write up, I write about that in my, I recount that again in my article on Blanca Peak. But it's he's up there in they call them the Winchell Lakes, these small lakes that are up there far above tree line, and he saw kind of a ghostly white buffalo that was up there, and he would kind of find strange. And these are lakes where there's not gonna you're not gonna find fish in it. There's no connection to anything. But he claims this witness to have seen strange kind of deformed fish in it. And there was another story. I think it was Lake Como, which is on the western side of Blanca Peak, and there were some people that claimed to see. It's very bizarre. I don't know what to make of it, but they swear that they saw a platypus in the lake there, and it's just or something that looked like a platypus, and it's kind of like, what is this, just something they made up, or are they seeing
A
strange?
beaver maybe, or man.
Well, exactly. You think but a beaver wouldn't be up there either, and that was the
No,
other
you're
thing, was
right.
they're so remote. It's you just wouldn't see anything, and they claim that they saw a platypus. And so it's kind of. And then as I kind of look further into it, there's kind of cryptozoologists, or those that kind of study these mysterious relic species that are said to exist. There's a whole kind of literature on strange platypuses seen in kind of in North America, and which I had never heard of before. And so apparently this is something that happens. So it's just, I don't know, it's fascinating stuff when you start getting into and delving into it. There's just a lot going on.
And those mountains are called the Sangre de Cristos, like the blood of Christ mountains. You can't even
You can't yeah,
get
you can't.
more Christian supernatural than calling a mountain range the blood of Christ.
And I'm sure those old Spanish, I'm sure they knew what was going on. I'm sure they saw strange things up there too.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. All right. So I got one more question for you. What is your favorite creature or story or monster that you've researched so far?
Well, I mentioned what I call the incident on Pot Mountain. So that's probably one of my favorite stories. It was a recent one, and it was in an area that I've been to, and I know, and I actually been kind of in the vicinity when the sighting took place. So I kind of like that one. Just the whole high strangeness of it, I think, is just fascinating. But there's so many interesting stories. But I think one of the ones that I enjoyed the most, and I thought was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to write about, even though it was so outlandish. but I called it the Time Lords of the 28th Century. It was a two-part one that I did, but it was about a civilization called the Wingmakers, and it's this whole bizarre story, and you just I can't even do it justice. But in any case, it involves some hikers in northwestern New Mexico were said to have come across a canyon, and something had happened, and there was some artifacts, I think it was, eroding out of this canyon, and they kind of found a cave, and they discovered something called ooparts, and ooparts means out of place artifacts. So it's the sort of thing that you kind of find on Ancient Aliens and stuff like that, like some sort of artifact that shouldn't be there, or it evinces a level of sophistication and technology that's doesn't match the time period. So these hikers, I guess they kind of mention it to the government, and then this whole convoluted story comes. So the government comes, the U.S. military, and then they kind of investigate it. The NSA gets involved, and all these secret government institutions and three-letter alphabet agencies, some of which no one's ever even heard of, and they kind of take control of this, and they start investigating it in earnest, and they start finding a whole network of caves snaking through this canyon, and there's one cave after another, and they each have strange artifacts and paintings on the walls, and it's kind of like a library, and they finally these scientists, a team of scientists is assembled to investigate it, and one guy, I think he kind of has like a telepathic communication or something, and he suddenly learns what it all means, and it's this civilization from the future has actually traveled into the past because they've dated the artifacts and found it kind of matches. Yeah, it's so bizarre, but they find that it's matched the Chaco culture, and it's kind of in that same time period. So it's definitely from the past, but they finally find out that it's this civilization from the 28th century, and they call themselves the Wingmakers. And there's and then the story just gets stranger and stranger, and there's a whole government agency that's taking control of these artifacts and everything that this civilization created. They kind of send these artifacts and these little, these almost like a library, back into the past to help us in our development of civilization, to help their civilization come into existence, because they can travel through time, and there's treaties involving, other alien species and interdimensional species. I mean, it's the wildest story. I mean, Bill Clinton gets involved in it. It's very 90s. It's very X-Files. It's, very coast to coast with Art Bell. I mean, it's got everything going on. I even made kind of a little video about it on YouTube, and talked about it on there, and kind of summarized it in there. So that, I would say, the Wingmakers, that's one of my favorites, just because it's so crazy, and it just has a little bit of everything going on there. And that's there's philosophy about God and about the universe, and everything's involved. Literally, there isn't.
What?
Yes, I mean, it's just mind blowing. So just as a story, it's great, and it all comes back to New Mexico. So it's said, and they don't, of course, they don't tell you what the where it was found, but it seems like it's kind of somewhere between. I think he mentioned somewhere between Chaco Canyon and maybe Aztec or Chama or something like that. So it's somewhere in those
There ain't
canyon
nothing
lands.
there. I've been there. There ain't
Yeah,
nothing
I
there.
know. I've been there too, but there's canyons. There's tons of
That's true.
canyons,
That's
and you
true.
have no idea what's back there. And I've even gone with my brother and investigated some. We went and looked at some paintings that were there on
But
some of the.
Angel Peak is in between those two, right?
Yes, it's so
Yeah.
there's Navajo Lake, there's all kinds of things that are up there, so it just makes you wonder, and it's just, of course, it's, the story is, I'm sure it's, of course, it's ridiculous, but it was fun. It was fun. I did a two-parter on it, and I had a lot of fun with that one. So it's just
That
good
must
to.
be an early one, because I hate that I'm not listening to that one yet.
It's yeah, it doesn't. That was one of the early ones that I
Okay, I'm
did,
going back
definitely.
in time since you started following me, even though we've
Yep.
known each other for over a year now. I
Yeah.
didn't know when you followed me that we knew each other,
Well,
but
that's I know. So it was kind of crazy. So it was fun,
that
but
is a amazing story.
yeah, you'll have to check it out. It's definitely one of my favorites.
All right, so I lied. One last question. Grand Canyon caves with, what do they call them? Like ancient Phoenician statues. What do you think about that?
Well, you know what?
You've heard about it, I assume.
I've heard about it, and the crazy thing is that I'm playing that for my next article on that one.
No.
It's yep,
Sorry. Yes.
that's
Perfect plug.
yeah, it's a perfect flow, but it really is. That's what I was gonna do. Kind of my idea was to do kind of like the different stories of underworld discoveries out here. There's a few too. There was a kind of another one in California about a an underground chamber that was found, and also another story that I found in a book by kind of a paranormal researcher named Brad Steiger, and he talks about yeah, I believe it was in Arizona, and there was like maybe back in the 30s, and he has kind of a firsthand account of this bizarre story about people hearing about a kind of a weird underground world and some strange beings or cults or something like that were living in there. So I was going to kind of that was my plan to talk about that, and also the Grand Canyon caves and things have been found there. So that's I think I'll try to talk about it there. And so I don't know. Right now I still have to do some research into that one, but it's a great story and I love it. I'd
It
love to
is.
kind of follow it, see where it goes.
Yeah. I mean, they barred him off. That's the only reason why I care about it is because why would they bar him off?
Exactly. Once you start going in those things, like there's other stories about strange remains that have been found that
Yeah.
were
And if you get too
disappeared.
close, they'll send helicopters and trucks after you and like
Oh, it's weird. It's strange
it,
stuff.
it is. It is. All right, brother. Well, this was a fantastic time. I've loved
I
it.
agree. I loved it too.
So, where can everyone hear and listen to you and read about you?
Well, they can find me on my Substack, which is the Weird and Wild West, and I also do, of course, as you mentioned, I do voiceover, so they can listen to the articles too. And that's where you can find me.
All right. Well, I am Thomas Wayne Riley. Thank y'all for listening, and we'll see you again soon in the American Southwest.